Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Heather with the Institute of Child Nutrition, and I would like to welcome you to July 2024 CACFP 101 webinar, Navigating Nutrition Facts Labels. During today's webinar, all attendees will be muted. Questions can be asked by typing them into the question box on your screen. We'll try to answer as many as possible, but not all may be addressed due to time constraints. Please use the QA box only for questions for the presenter. After the webinar, a link to a short survey will appear. Completing this survey helps us plan future webinars. Registered individuals will receive a follow-up email within 24 hours containing a recording link on iLearn, which is ICN's online learning platform, and the survey link in case you missed it. Webinar certificates will be emailed within 24 hours as well. Note that the slide deck won't be shared today. This webinar will only be available in video format within iLearn. So by the end of this webinar, attendees will identify the different components of a nutrition facts label. They'll identify practical tips for using nutritional facts labels to make healthier food choices in the CACFP. The views and opinions expressed in this webinar are solely those of the presenter and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the Institute of Child Nutrition. And today's guest presenter is Isabel Ramos-Lebron. She's a bilingual nutrition education specialist and a registered dietitian at the National CACFP Sponsors Association, dedicated to serving communities through education and promoting access to nutritious foods. Initially, she entered the food service industry and assumed the role of patient service manager for the Formula and Human Milk Management Center within the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia back in 2013. Her responsibilities were ensuring the well-being of patients and managing their dietary needs. Subsequently, Isabel transitioned to the San Antonio Food Bank, where she served as the Wellness Education Manager for 8 years. In this capacity, she led a team of nutrition education coordinators focusing on educating low socioeconomic children and families about nutrition. Her mission extended beyond the theory. She taught practical skills, including how to prepare healthy meals on a budget. This also included developing and reviewing CACFP menus for young children and older adults to provide nutritious foods to the community. Isabel's commitment to health and wellness continued through other opportunities. She became a certified health coach, educating individuals diagnosed with prediabetes, and became a mentor for school-age children in making healthful choices in their school and community. Currently, Isabel is employed with the National CACFP Association. Move my screen here so I can see the rest of this. My apologies. Her focus lies in, I can't get the little screen to move. There we go. Currently, Isabel is employed with the NCA. Her focus lies in imparting knowledge about CACFP nutrition and regulations to sponsors and providers working within the USDA Child Nutrition Program. She's dedicated to helping CACFP operators promote healthy eating habits, which helps ensure nutrition security for all when CACFP meals are served. So Isabel is no stranger to us. She's actually was featured on our very first ICN CACFP 101 webinar. So we are glad to welcome her back for our official 1-year anniversary. So welcome, Isabel. We're excited to hear what all you have to say. We always love hearing from you and our friends at NCA.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me here. I am super excited to be here, and I'm going to go ahead and try to get onto my slide. Just give me 2 seconds and I'll be there in a shape. All right. Well, hello, everybody. It's always a pleasure to be back here with ICN. And I'm so excited about teaching this topic today. I think it's so important to talk about how to read a nutrition fact label. It tells us so much information about the foods we eat and helping to make healthy choices. And so, as Heather mentioned, I'm not going to go through the long introduction, but again, my name is Isabel Ramos-Lebron. I'm the nutrition education specialist and registered dietitian at NCA. So before we even get started, I really want to talk. I am a nerd when it comes to learning about history, and I want to talk about the history of the nutrition fact label and where it came from. Later on, we are going to be talking about nutrition fact labels, how we apply it to CACFP, but I want to give you a little bit of information about where did this even get started. The nutrition fact label is still relatively new when you look at the historical information. The infancy of its creation actually begins in 1906. It's not seen in this timeline because it will be superseded with the 1938 Act, which we will discuss on the next slide. The Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906 was the first federal law that banned any adulterated foods from being sold or transported across state lines. You might wonder, as did I, what was adulterated foods? What does that even mean? These are food products that contain chemical compounds or substances that have been intentionally added to the food while knowing they are toxic or undesirable. This act was amended a few times before 1938, where a more stringent federal law was signed. All right, so signed by Theodore Roosevelt, a new law called Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act was signed on June 25th, 1938. As mentioned, this supersedes the Pure Foods and Drug Act of 1906. The new law contained provisions including authorizing standards of identity, quality, and fill of container for foods, providing that safe tolerances be set for unavoidable poisonous substances, required drugs to be properly labeled with sufficient direction on how to use it safely, control to cosmetics and therapeutic devices. But it was in 1939 that the first food standards were issued. They were for canned tomato products like canned tomatoes, tomato puree, and tomato paste. And this is where food standards began. And by the 1960s, about half the foods made available to purchase, food standards were required. This was because manufacturers and food technologies could find different ingredients to modify foods like fortifying nutrients. Standard recipes were needed for these foods, and if the food deviated from these recipes, it would be considered an imitation and labeled as such. All right, we're going to move into the 1940s to the 1960s. As processed foods were becoming standardized, some foods were required to have food labels to show calories or sodium content. Usually, these were foods meant for special dietary uses to help meet a specific dietary need. During this era, meals were being prepared with basic ingredients, and not much of a demand for nutrition labeling was really demanded. But as the availability of processed foods became easily accessible in the marketplace, consumers wanted to know what was being added or removed from the food that they were purchasing and their nutritional makeup. So in 1969, a recommendation to the FDA was made to develop a system for nutritional labeling of foods. This recommendation came from the 1969 White House Conference on Food, Nutrition, and Health. This was the first conference and pivotal event that influenced the country's food policy agenda for the next 50 years. We just recently, a couple of years ago, already had our second White House Conference on Food, Nutrition, and Health. So if you wanted to know more about that, you can definitely check on USDA.gov for that information. All right, moving on to 1973. In response to the recommendation made in 1969, FDA issued a final rule called the Voluntary Nutrition Labeling of Packaged Foods. This regulation that when nutrition labeling was required to appear in FDA-regulated foods, it must contain specific nutrient information, which were calories, protein, carbohydrates, plus certain vitamins and minerals, such as vitamin A, C, thiamine, riboflavin, niacin, calcium, and iron. Other nutrients such as sodium, saturated fat, and unsaturated fats were at the manufacturer's discretion and not required. Now, your ears might have just started perking up a little bit because some of this is starting to sound like the food label we know today. So now you're starting to see it form into something that we know, right? So this is getting exciting. Moving on to 1990. In 1990, Nutrition Labeling and Education Act was also known as NLEA, allowed FDA to have explicit authority for nutrition labeling, required manufacturers to disclose specific nutrients, but provided some discretion to add or remove nutrients that are required to be declared on the label. Information on the label must be in context to the total daily diet, or in other words, an amount customarily consumed. So for example, if consumers usually had a cup of cereal, that's typically what they would put on the label, saying 1 cup of cereal equals this many calories, protein, carbohydrates, all those things. Not necessarily is the correct serving size for that person. And here's an example of what that label looked like. So some of you might recognize this from previous years, and we'll show this again in a later slide. But I grew up with this label, and many of you most have as well. How about raise your hands for me if this is something that you grew up with, seeing this nutrition fact label that you find and you recognize. All right. Okay, I see quite a few of you giving me, some applauses and thumbs up. I love it. Thank you. So I'm not alone in this. So yes, in 1990, we see this label now. It came before him a little bit, but this is when we really seen this nutrition fact label. All right. And finally, we're going to go to 2016, one of the most exciting years for me. I became a dietitian at the time. I was already a dietitian, but this was kind of fun as a new nutrition movement for us. So in 2016, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration updated requirements for the nutrition facts label on packaged foods and drinks. FDA required changes to the nutrition fact label based on updated scientific information, new nutrition research, and input from the public. This was the first major update to the label in over 20 years. The refreshed design and updated information make it easier for you to make informed food choices that contribute to lifelong healthy eating habits. Okay, here's an example of what the nutrition facts label looked like until the year 2020. So this is in earlier 1990, and many of you grew up with this nutrition facts label. But the updated nutrition facts label was released in 2016, and food manufacturers were required to label their product by 2020 with this updated label. With this update, FDA developed a social media toolkit. My favorite ones are the videos that could be used to share with the community, as they are fun, quick, and informative. You can still use these for quick trainings or reminders with your staff. Here's an example of one of these videos.
These are your strongest features, so I really brought them out. They say so much about you. You ready?
Calories and serving size? So bold. You listed new information here, like potassium and added sugars. I'll definitely turn heads at the grocery store.
All right. Who's next?
See what's new and what's been updated. The new Nutrition Facts Label. See what's in it for you at fda.gov/new nutrition facts label.
All right, well, I hope you liked that video. They're short and sweet. There's a lot of them. They actually talk about, also they just focus on certain parts of the nutrition fact label. So if you want to learn more about added sugars, now they have that there just because how the label changed over time. We're actually going to cover the nutrition fact label in more detail in an upcoming slide. Now that we know the background of how the nutrition fact label came to be, we are going to go ahead and discuss how to read them. Later, we will talk about how to use this information in the CACFP. We know that nutrition facts label help individuals evaluate and consider which foods are nutrient dense and gears consumers to make healthy choices. But what other reasons do people look at for the label? Why do they look at it? There are many reasons why a consumer would read the label. It could be due to health concerns, perhaps they have high blood pressure and must lower their sodium intake, or medical conditions such as diabetes where they need a carbohydrate count, or a disability where a child is allergic to peanuts, or it could be to dietary religious preferences that certain individuals prefer not to eat certain ingredients for foods. For example, they may be vegetarian and they do not want to eat products that contain meat in it. Another factor is to help CACFP providers find CACFP credible foods to serve to those in their care. So they may provide healthy meals, but also receive that reimbursement. Okay, so you're ready to read the food label. I've separated out into 5 sections, which we will go over in detail. The majority of this information can be found on fda.gov. So if you ever wanted to get some more information about nutrition fact label reading, I highly recommend fda.gov. We're also going to be giving you a resource later in this, so pay attention to that chat. We'll be dropping in some links for you there as well. All right, so we're going to go from the top to the bottom. So many individuals would miss this part prior to the update. So this very first section, they would just skip down to the calories and assume the whole package was the caloric amount. Also, serving size wasn't bolded before, so perhaps this is why people missed it altogether. Let's go over the two terms in this section and explain what they are. Servings per container shows the total number of servings in the entire food package or container. In this package, there are 8 servings. Serving size is based on the amount of food that is customarily eaten at one time and is not a recommendation of how much to eat or drink. Serving size is shown as a common household measure that is appropriate to the food, such as a cup, tablespoon, maybe it's a piece, a slice. So it could be a lot of these different things. Then it's followed by a metric amount in grams. We will come back to the metric amount when we apply this information to the CACFP. All right. The calories section went under a huge change. This section was enlarged and bolded to consume, so consumers could easily read how many calories were in each serving. But what is a calorie? Calories refer to the total number of calories or energy supplied from all sources, from the carbohydrate, fat, protein, in a serving of the food. Calories needs may be higher or lower and vary depending on the child's or adult's age, sex, height, weight, and physical activity level. We don't use calories in the CACFP to determine credible foods, but it is good information to know regardless. In this section, in this blue section, we're going to talk about 3 things. We're going to talk about total fats, cholesterol, and sodium. Fat is found in foods from both plants and animals. Total fat on the nutrition label includes saturated fat, which is usually solid at room temperature and usually found in high amounts in animal-based products. Think of butter and how it stays solid at room temperature. It contains saturated fats in there. Trans fat is also on that food label. This is an unsaturated fat. This type of fat is in fact detrimental to our health, and partially hydrogenated oils are no longer added to foods. In the past, you could see it in many processed foods, including margarine. I remember going to the grocery store when just even maybe like 5-6 years ago, and I would see partially hydrogenated products. Now you don't see them on the market anymore. And also companies can choose to add the poly and mono unsaturated fats. Those are ones that we would consider are healthier fat options. Those are linked to reduced risks of cardiovascular disease. Fat does play a major role in our body. Fat is actually the secondary energy source once energy from carbohydrates are used up. It also plays important functions in our body. Fats help with proper growth and development, aids getting fat-soluble vitamins absorbed into the body, plays a role in maintaining healthy skin, and also help you feel full. But you want to reduce the amount of certain types of fats, right? So saturated fats and trans fats. This follows the dietary guidelines for Americans, recommendations, and something that we do see as a best practice in the CACFP. Moving down to cholesterol. Did you know your body already makes all the cholesterol it needs? We don't really need to consume it. This dietary cholesterol can typically be found in animal-based foods. Many foods that are higher in dietary cholesterol are generally higher in saturated fats. And diets higher in saturated fats are associated with an increased risk of developing cardiovascular disease. So we always just want to be mindful of how much cholesterol is in something, how often we're serving it. So it's not saying that you can't have it, it's just seeing if we're trying to reduce saturated fats, we want to also make sure that, because it goes hand in hand with cholesterol, that it's not too high, right? So our next one is sodium. Sodium is an essential nutrient that the human body needs in relatively small amounts. Sodium is important for many body processes, such as fluid balance, muscle contraction, and nervous system function. Sodium has many purposes when added to foods such as curing meats, thickening agent preservatives, and flavor enhancer. Diets that contain high sodium intake increases the risk of developing high blood pressure. A teaspoon of salt a day is all that is recommended. 1 teaspoon of salt equals out to 2,300 milligrams of sodium. I'm always amazed by that number. It's a lot, right? But in such a small amount, and we don't need that much. For children, the recommendation is to consume less than this amount. In our next section, we're going to cover total carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are the primary energy source for the body once it breaks down carbohydrates into a sugar known as glucose. Carbohydrates are found primarily in plant foods. The exception is dairy products, which contain a milk sugar called lactose. Total carbohydrates on the nutrition fact labels include dietary fiber. This consists of soluble and non-soluble fibers, dietary fiber, that help move food through the digestive system and helps you stay full longer. Total sugars is the combination of natural sugars from foods and added sugars. A lot of people have always asked me, what is an added sugar? Well, added sugars, which includes sugars that are added in the processing of foods, such as sucrose or dextrose, or foods packaged as sweeteners, such as table sugar, sugars from syrups and honey, and sugars from concentrated fruits or vegetable juices. Following the DGA, CACFP aims to reduce added sugars because it shows that if you're having a lot of foods with lots of added sugar, it may take away from the nutrients the children need or adults that are in your care. So we always want to reduce the amount of added sugar, and that is a goal of CACFP along with the dietary guidelines for Americans. And finally, vitamins are organic substances that are naturally present in many plant and animal products. People obtain vitamins from both the plant and animal products they eat. There are 14 vitamins that may be found on the label. Minerals are inorganic substances that are found naturally in soil and water. They are absorbed by plants, which are then eaten by people and other animals. People obtain minerals from both the plant and animal products they eat. There are 14 minerals that may be found on the label. So manufacturers must declare the actual amount of vitamin D, calcium, iron, and potassium, including the percent daily value. They can voluntarily declare the amount for other vitamins and minerals. Prior to the update, the 4 nutrients were vitamin A, vitamin C, iron, and calcium. So why the change on some of those nutrients? At the time when vitamin A and vitamin C were first evaluated, there were deficiencies indicating that individuals did need more of these nutrients. This is no longer the case, and it is a rare occurrence that you could see these deficiencies. However, vitamin D and potassium were added because these are nutrients Americans don't always get enough of, according to research. And when there are deficiencies in these nutrients, there's an increase in chronic diseases. Calcium and iron remain the same as nutrients that, and they're not going to be getting rid of because we're still needing to focus on those as well to make sure we're getting a healthy amount of those. There are multiple ways in which you will see the nutrition facts label. Here are 2 examples. This is your standard nutrition facts label with all the basic requirements of what a food label needs. And this is an example of the extra nutrients being voluntarily reported by the manufacturer to include in the label. A lot of times you will see this with fortified cereals. Also, you can see the nutrition fact label in other ways. It could be more of a horizontal view. I've seen those before. So keep in mind the nutrition fact label might look a little bit different based on the packaging, but it must at least have the standard nutrition information that you see here on the left. The nutrition facts label provides important information on the nutritional makeup of the product. However, you still need to know what is in the food you're purchasing. That's why there is the ingredient list to let consumers know what ingredients have been added to make this product. Also, manufacturers are required to list the top 9 food allergens if they are present in the product. There are 2 ways they can report this. The first is within the ingredient. They must put into the parenthesis the common name of the allergen. For example, you may see the word cream, but the manufacturer must use the common name as well. So they must write milk in parentheses. This is one of those options. The second is listing the food allergens after the ingredient list and using the word contains with the following food allergens it contains. As a reminder, manufacturers are only required to report the top 9 food allergens, which are milk, egg, fish, shellfish, tree nuts, peanuts, wheat, soybeans, and sesame. There are foods, though, that do not require the nutrition facts label, and those are whole fruits and vegetables that have not been processed. When we talk about process, it is when the food has been manipulated from its original form, such as manufacturers slicing apples. Many times they add preservatives to maintain freshness. A nutrition fact label is required. So when you see baby carrots in a package, they have to have a nutrition fact label. It's no longer the original carrots with the green ends either. So as a reminder, when you see a whole fruit and vegetable, it would not typically have a nutrition fact label on it. Although sometimes I will say if they sell it in bags, like a 5-pound bag of apples, you might see it there. So if you're curious about that, you can do that. But usually if you're just buying it individually, or maybe you're ordering a huge package of it to be sent to your center, or maybe you're buying a bushel at a farmer's market, you won't see a nutrition fact label on those. Need a reminder about reading the food label? NCA has a resource for you to download and share with others. We'll share this link later, or as we're going through the presentation. Actually, Heather did a wonderful job and already put it in the chat for you all to take a look, and you can save this. I love saving all these resources into my favorite bar because I'm always bookmarking things and reviewing it later on. But this is a free resource for you to help remind you, but also can use it as an educational opportunity too of what to focus on when you're thinking about the nutrition fact label and wanting to understand it better. Okay, now that you have a good grasp of the nutrition facts label, I know we cover a lot of information, so hopefully y'all are still with me. How do we apply it in the CACFP? We can use this for all 5 meal components to help make informed decisions on whether a food is credible in the CACFP. We'll first talk about how to identify creditable grains, whole grain rich, and breakfast cereals using the nutrition facts label. What grains are credible in the CACFP? A lot of times we do have this question. Well, USDA created this wonderful resource for us to always refer back to help us determine what's a credible grain. And they are whole grain flour, whole grain meal, corn masa, hominy, enriched flour, enriched meal, bran, and germs. Those are the most common types of grains. Now there is more. They have a whole list on this handout. Again, this is a USDA resource you can find on their website. You can find it at cacfp.org as well. But this is just a reminder, if you need some refreshers of what a credible grain might be, this is a really great resource. Okay, you've identified the credible grain, but you need to know if the product you're purchasing is in fact credible. There are 2 criteria that must be met. The first is the grain product must contain at least 0.25 ounce equivalent grains per serving in the CACFP. The second, it must prove true with one of these statements below. The first ingredient, or second after water, is an enriched grain, whole grain, bran, or germ. Or the ingredient list includes a list of nutrients used to enrich or fortify the grain, flour, or meal. Or the grain product is labeled as enriched, fortified, or whole grain. Or finally, if the primary grain is not credible, but there are other credible grains in the product, a document must be obtained by the manufacturer stating the grams of credible grains per serving. Remember, it still needs to follow the first criteria. There must be a minimum of 0.25 ounce equivalent of credible grains per serving. Knowing just this information we discussed, take a careful look at the ingredient listed here. Just by looking at the ingredients, is this product credible in the CACFP? You're planning to serve a ½ ounce equivalent of this grain. So we already know that there is more than 0.25 ounce equivalent. So taking a look at this ingredient list, I see unbleached enriched flour, and I'm seeing some nutrients in there, gram flour, and let's see if there's any other ones here. I don't see any other grains. So we're going to launch the poll. Is this graham cracker credible in the CACFP? Do you think yes, no, or maybe? All right. So we're going to give it a little bit of time, but so this is great. So taking a look at that ingredient list again, I always like to read it a few times because sometimes it gets tricky and maybe I miss something. It's always important to go line by line, right? So ingredients say unbleached enriched flour. Then in parentheses says wheat flour, niacin, reduced iron, thiamine, mononitrates, which is also known as vitamin B1, riboflavin, which is also known as vitamin B2, folic acid. Then we have gram flour, which is just whole grain wheat flour is how they're talking about it. And then there's some extra things like sugar, soybean, canola oil, honey, leavening, salt, soy, lecithin, artificial flavor. Okay, so, all right. So we closed down that poll and 71% of you said yes, 21% of you said no, and 9% said maybe. And that's okay. Sometimes we just don't know the answer. We want someone to tell us. So we're going to give you that answer on the next slide. So the answer is yes. If we look at the ingredient list, the first ingredient is unbleached enriched flour. Enriched flour, because we already know it's already more than a ½ ounce equivalent of grain. And the first ingredient is unbleached enriched flour. So we know that this is a credible grain. We're not talking about whole grain rich yet. We're just talking about grains that are credible in the CACFP. A wonderful USDA resource that I use often is using ounce equivalents for grains in the CACFP resource. The grains measuring chart provided tells you how much of a grain item you need to serve to meet the CACFP meal plan requirements. We'll show you an example on the following slides. This I use this on a daily basis. I highly recommend, if you don't know about this, to definitely bookmark it, print it out, put it somewhere where you see it, because you will use it on a daily basis if you menu plan. We are looking at, okay, so we're gonna do an exercise together. We're looking at graham crackers still. So the nutrition facts label states that if you serve 8 crackers, also explained as two full cracker sheets, this would equal to 30 grams. Let's take a look at the ounce equivalent chart for graham crackers. It helps you understand how much you need for the age group you are serving. Here we see that a ½ ounce equivalent of graham crackers would be 1 cracker that is 5 inches by 2.5 inches or 14 grams. And we're serving ages 1 through 5-year-olds. But because we do not know the size of the graham cracker just by reading the nutrition fact label, we need to confirm this by viewing the grams in the product. Looking at the nutrition facts label and chart, how many graham crackers do you need to serve? Do you think it's 1 cracker, 2 crackers, or not enough information? So taking a look at that, we gave you the nutrition facts label, taking a look at that serving size, look at the gram amount, it says 30 grams. And then we're gonna look at that bottom chart provided by USDA, the ounce equivalents. And it says 14 grams will give us a ½ ounce equivalent. And that's what we want. We want a ½ ounce equivalent. So we'll launch that poll, and we want you to know what you all think is, how many graham crackers do I need to serve? 1 cracker, 2 crackers, or not enough information? All right, and if you don't know, that's okay too. You can make a guess if you'd like. Always, sometimes we're taking a guess because maybe we think we know the answer, and that's okay. I'm a forever learner, and so whether it's right or wrong, we learn something from that as well. But this is a great question, something very common. You might have other types of crackers that you might be serving, and this might be very useful to you too. And I'll talk a little bit more too about possible other resources that can help you as well. Okay, so let me know if you think it's 1 cracker, 2 crackers, or not enough information. Okay. And again, you can do this in your own local grocery store. Maybe you already have this in your pantry right now, and you're like, let me go check. More than welcome to go check. That's always a fun exercise. All right. So here are the answers. So how many crackers do I need to serve if we're doing a ½ ounce equivalent? So 30% said 1 cracker, 57% said 2 crackers, and 13% said not enough information. The answer is actually 1 cracker. Now you might be wondering why. So let's do the math together. First, let's look at the nutrition facts label. Serving size is 30 grams for 2 sheets. Because we only need 14 grams, you would divide the 30 grams by 2. This equals to 15 grams, which is above our minimum requirements. 1 full cracker equals 15 grams, which equals a ½ ounce equivalent in the CACFP. Now, this is just one way to do math. There are other ways to calculate this, and actually USDA does provide you a worksheet to calculate grains as well. This is just one way to figure it out. USDA does have a wonderful ounce calculator sheet that you can do, And I actually highly recommend if you do that math, or if you do this type of math, have it with your product to then show that, hey, this is a 1/2 ounce equivalent. I always like to always have it on file so I don't have to work twice. And it's always there saying, oh, this is how I figured that out. And if a monitor comes or you get audited, you already have the answer right there. Next is whole grain rich. What is whole grain rich? This is a term developed by USDA. Foods that meet the whole grain rich criteria are foods that contain at least 50% whole grains, and the remaining grains in the food are enriched or are 100% whole grain. Now, there are 6 ways to meet the whole grain rich criteria, and I just saw Heather put the link in the chat, so go ahead and you can take a look at that or save it for later. As a reminder, when operating in the CACFP, CACFP operators must serve 1 whole grain rich grain component once per day when grains are served. Today, we are only going to focus on one method, the rule of 3, which requires us to use the ingredient list to determine if the product is whole grain rich. The rule of 3 is when the first ingredient or second after water is whole grain and the next 2 grain ingredients, if there's any listed, must be whole grain, enriched grain, bran, or germ. We can disregard any grain derivatives or if a grain ingredient follows the statement 2% or less, because there is an insignificant amount of grain, which we can then again disregard. Knowing this information and thinking about that rule of 3, look at this ingredient label. Are the graham crackers in this package considered whole grain rich? Again, this is the same one we've been looking at. And so let's take a look at the ingredient list together. So we first see in the ingredient unbleached enriched flour. It says it has wheat flour in it, it has niacin, has a reduced iron, it has more vitamins in there as well. And then we have graham flour, which is whole grain wheat flour. And then we see a few other items, but I don't see any other grains in here. So knowing the rule of 3, are these graham crackers whole grain rich? What do you think? We're going to launch that poll and you let us know if you think these crackers are whole grain rich. And again, if you don't know, that's okay. We're going to reveal the answer on the next slide. So again, we're looking at this. We're looking at its enriched flour. I see graham flour. I'm trying to see if there's any other ones. That's why I say always read it a few times, because sometimes we miss a grain in there. And so it's always important to just double check. And usually they'll use the common name sometimes in parentheses just to help you understand what's in that product. And because wheat is an allergy, a food allergen, you can see that they do put the common term in parentheses. So then it says contains wheat and soy on the bottom. But as you may have noticed, it does have in parentheses wheat. So you knew that that was, if someone has an allergy to wheat, it's there. So I always think there's so much information from a nutrition fact label. It's great. All right, so we're kind of split here. 48% say yes, 47% say no, and 5% said maybe. Well, let's find out together. The answer is no. Although we had determined the graham crackers were a credible grain in the CACFP, they are not whole grain rich because the first ingredient is not a whole grain. Could you serve these graham crackers though? Yes, you can. But you'll need to find another grain to count as whole grain rich grain component for another meal or snack being served that day. So if you're only serving breakfast, if you're only serving breakfast, no lunch or supper or snacks, you'll have to find, if you're not using a meat meat alternate, because you can do that 3 times a week to substitute your grain. But if you're putting your grain in there, it must be whole grain rich that day. But if you're serving a breakfast and maybe a lunch, one of those grains, either from breakfast or lunch, should be whole grain rich, right? So just keeping that in mind. Another way we use the nutrition facts label is when we search for credible breakfast cereals to serve in the CACFP. There are 2 steps you need to take. Make sure the breakfast cereal is a credible grain in the CACFP and does not exceed the sugar limits for cereals. The current regulation requires that there is no more than 6 grams of total sugar per dry ounce. Keyword is total sugar. However, it is important to note that the 2024 final rule did come out this year. the Child Nutrition Program's meal patterns consistent with the 2020 to 2025 Dietary Guideline for Americans was released on April 24th of 2024 and has indicated that by October 1st, 2025, in the CACFP, breakfast cereals can have no more than 6 grams of added sugar per dry ounce. The current resource on our website that you see here, that's actually in the chat, was put in, is identifying cereal sugar limits. This is based on current regulations, not on the new regulations to be in effect in 2025. Now, if you work in a school, this regulation might be a little bit different. It might be earlier on in the year. In CACFP only, it is in effect in October 1st, 2025. Let's do an exercise together and learn how to determine if this breakfast cereal is credible in the CACFP based on current regulations. First, we will determine if the cereal meets the sugar limits. Take a look at the chart on the left. There are 2 columns, one to provide serving sizes in grams, and the other column with grams of sugar. When looking at the serving size in one row, the grams of sugar cannot exceed what appears on the chart in the same row. Now, looking at the nutrition facts label, we have identified that the serving size for this breakfast cereal is 1/1/3 cup or 39 grams. Looking at the chart on the left, we select the row that has the range of 36 to 40 grams. Next, we look at the total sugars on the nutrition facts label. It reads 8 grams. Looking at the chart, the sugars cannot be more than 8 grams on that same row. This cereal meets the sugar limits in the CACFP, but is the breakfast cereal credible as a grain component in the CACFP? Let's find out, because that's the second criteria we have to look at. Using the identifying whole grain rich flowchart, this will help you quickly determine if the cereal is credible in the CACFP. Starting at the top, are we looking at a breakfast cereal? Yes, we are. Next question, does it meet the sugar limit requirements? Since we already figured that part out in the previous slide, we can confidently say yes. Moving down our flowchart, the following question is the first ingredient, second after water, a whole grain? On the left-hand side of the screen, I'm showing you the ingredient list to help us figure out the answer. Let's take a look at it together. The first words after ingredient is whole grain oats. Whole grain oats is a credible grain and reading whole grain in describing the type of oat used in the cereal. So the answer is yes. Now we look at the next question. Is it fortified with vitamins and minerals? Looking at the ingredient list, the bottom half of that list shows vitamins and minerals that have been added to the cereal, also known as fortifying the cereal. So the answer is yes. Since we answered yes to all of these criteria, we have determined that this breakfast cereal is whole grain rich. I recommend that anytime you do determine a breakfast cereal is whole grain rich, keep that nutrition facts label and ingredient list with the product name to refer back to in the future. Also, write down whether it is whole grain rich. That will help you develop your menu. Make sure that in your menu, you're always having that whole grain rich item when grains are served each day. Moving on to the meat meat alternate meal components. We use the nutrition facts label to help us determine if a yogurt, sweetened or unsweetened, is credible in the CACFP. Similar to breakfast cereal, yogurt too has a sugar limit. The current regulations state that yogurt can have no more than 23 grams of total sugar per 6 ounces. However, just like breakfast cereals, the sugar regulation will change in October 1st, 2025. In the CACFP, there can be no more than 12 grams of added sugar per 6 ounces. In the next few slides, we'll be referencing this resource. Is your yogurt CACFP credible? Again, this resource is based on the current CACFP sugar guidelines for yogurt. And again, you'll see it in the chat, the link. The chart on the right has 3 columns. Starting from left to right, column 1 is the serving size in ounces. Next is the serving size in grams, and then the sugar limit for each measurement by row. Now let's look at the nutrition fact label for this yogurt. The serving size says 2/3 cup Since we don't have cups in the chart, we move to the next measurement reported, 170 grams. And we match it to the table. Next, we look at total sugars on the nutrition facts label. It says 21 grams. Looking at the chart on the same row, we selected the serving size in grams. Does your yogurt exceed the sugar limits? The answer is no. So this yogurt is considered credible in the CACFP. So ready to try this on your own? Take a look at the nutrition facts label for this yogurt. Is this yogurt CACFP credible? We will give you a little bit of time to review the label and chart before launching the poll. So taking a look at the nutrition facts label, I always like to start from top to bottom, but remember, I told you that nutrition fact labels could change. They could look horizontal. So this is an example of a horizontal nutrition fact label. You still read left to right though. So starting from the nutrition fact label title, I start working my way down and then I'll go down and then move to the right. So as you can see, nutrition fact label says 8 servings per pack and says 1 container. Again, 1 container is not a measurement we use. So I would look at 113 grams on the chart. Then I'm going to go ahead into that third column of the nutrition fact label and look for my total sugars for now. Remember, next year, October 1st, 2025, it'll change to added sugars. But right now, we're just looking at total sugars. And so total sugars, it says 14 grams. So I'm going to go ahead and take a look at my chart on the bottom and match those two things up and see what it is. So go ahead, we're going to launch that poll and you let me know what you think. Is this yogurt CACFP credible? And again, it's okay if you don't know the answer, you're not quite sure. You can take a guess, you can take a stab at it, or you can say maybe. That's okay too. But is this yogurt credible? So I always like to read the other parts of the nutrition fact label. It has some protein in there, it's always nice. It has that calcium that I want to make sure those in my care do get. Especially because if there's a lot of children, you want that healthy bone development happening. Has a little bit of vitamin D, which is great as well. That also aids with bone development and other things too. They also added vitamin A. They didn't have to, but the manufacturer decided to add vitamin A to this as well. So we can know if there was vitamin A in this yogurt. So I think that's really cool. So that manufacturers do add those extra nutrients just for us to know what else is in there. Okay, let's see. All right, so let's take a look at the results. So I have 79% of you saying yes, 18% of you saying no, and 4% saying maybe. All right, and the answer is yes, it is. This yogurt is credible in the CACFP. Looking at the nutrition facts label, we see that the serving size is 113 grams. We match the table, we match that up to the table. Next, we look for total sugars, and it says 14 grams on the nutrition facts label. There is less total sugar and does not exceed the sugar limit. So yes, it is credible in the CACFP. There are many other ways we can use the nutrition facts label. When you are choosing leaner cuts of meat, you can look at the fat content. Usually we're focusing on having 30% less of fats. The leaner is going to be less saturated fat, less cholesterol in those. Looking for lower sodium processed foods, such as canned black beans. You can find it with less sodium or no salt added. And this could be for many other types of products as well. If you're choosing to serve a muffin, look for ones with less added sugar in there. Now you know how to read the nutrition fact label, and so you can see what has a lot of added sugar or what has less added sugar. You can compare different types of products together to make the best healthful choice for those in your care. You can also make sure the fruit or vegetable juice you're serving is made from 100% juice. It's always tricky because you have to actually look right at the nutrition fact label. Right above it, usually they write it. So if it says 10% juice, then of course this is not 100% juice. So the nutrition fact label is very helpful. You can look at the ingredient list, but you can also look for that percentage too. And usually too, on the front of the package, it will say 100% juice as well. And identifying milk alternatives that are nutritionally equivalent to cow's milk. This is very helpful as well because then we can compare our nutrition fact label along with our if we're looking at a milk alternative, we look at our nutrition fact label there, and then we can look at our standard cow's milk nutrition fact label. There's one on the Crediting Handbook for CACFP. We have a few resources on our website as well at cacfp.org, and I'm sure the ICN does as well. So there's a lot of resources for you to determine that. And I do get a lot of questions on milk alternatives. So your state agency might have a list already of acceptable of nutrient equivalent milk alternatives already. So you can go ahead and ask them for that if they have it. That's always something helpful. There is no universal list for it because products do change and manufacturers change their formula whenever they like to, or whenever they want it to be a little bit more palatable. And so that's probably why a list doesn't exist nationally at this time. And a few more places where you can get resources, and many of them we've talked about today. So USDA.gov, I did definitely talk a lot about FDA.gov with the nutrition facts label. So if you want to read more about that. If you want to learn more about resources that we have at the National CACFP Sponsors Association, or NCA, you can go to cacfp.org, or the ICN. ICN has wonderful resources as well, so the ICN.org. And your state agency website does have materials as well for you to help you operate the CACFP. And I would be remiss in not inviting you to our Facebook group for the National CACFP Sponsors Association. We have a wonderful community that people ask questions, they help each other out. It's a really great group. You can post your favorite meal there as well. Show us what you're making. We always want to know. And it always gives people inspiration too on what they can update in their menu. I think we're always looking for that as well. We're always looking at that Facebook group, and we will answer questions as well. And I'm going to pass it back on to Heather, but I appreciate you all, and thank you all for having me here today.
Always such a great source of information, Isabel. You bring a lot of energy to the table, and we love, as you can see, everyone is applauding you and thumbs ups and all these great hearts. We have had a few questions, and we're able to moderate those behind the scenes. Now, I will say to our audience, don't fret about capturing every link that we shared in the chat. And what I would encourage you to do is just go to our iLearn portal. Once this webinar is available on the iLearn, it's in a recorded version, and you'll see at the top link a resource tab. And within that resource tab, we will list all of those links that we shared in our webinar today. And if you guys have questions, we have some time for a few questions. So make sure you put those into our Q&A box there so that we can take a look at them. So we asked for a printout of the question and answers. I guess that's something that we've not ever considered doing, but we certainly can do that. There was a question about the yogurt that you added to smoothies. Do the same rules apply when you use yogurt for smoothies and additional fruit gets added? And yes, yogurt in smoothies for CACFP participants must not exceed the sugar limit. But I think there was a clarifying that asked, but do you also need to account for the extra sugar that could be added, such as adding extra fruit or juice? Do you want to answer that, Isabel?
There's no guidance about that, but I'm going to give you my own kind of thought on it. Is that usually I recommend use unflavored yogurt. Use unflavored yogurt, or use the sweetened sugar use like a vanilla flavored yogurt that meets the sugar limits or less. And then you can add your fruit. Fruit is a natural sugar. It is not considered an added sugar when it's a whole fruit. Once actually whole fruit is actually pureed into a smoothie, it's counted as juice. So I always tell people, be careful if you're serving juice twice in one day. If you have a smoothie and a juice, only one of them will be reimbursable in the CACFP if you're crediting it towards a fruit or vegetable. But you don't have to account for the fruit plus the yogurt. The only thing I always caution, like, you don't need to add extras. There's like extra sugars in there because the fruit has natural sugars in it. Or if you're using a vanilla flavored yogurt, I wouldn't add more sugars because they already have sugars in there present and naturally and added. So as long as it meets the sugar limits, you're okay. And you can credit it towards the CACFP.
Yep, thanks, Isabel. So the last question we have is, can you restate how to know if the item is whole grain again? So again, we place those links in the chat. They'll be available at the webinar, or in the webinar recording. But Isabel, if you just want to like the top three, repeat them very briefly.
With whole grain rich, there are 6 ways to figure it out. We have meal pyramids on our website that actually break it down into 6 videos, but we also have our flow chart there as well, which the flow chart is my favorite thing because it really guides you through identifying if your product is whole grain rich, whether you're looking at the ingredient list, maybe you're using the WIC list, You could use, if it's creditable in schools in NSLP, it also can be considered, and it's considered whole grain rich in the school, you could possibly use it. Just make sure it's not a grain-based dessert, because we have different regulations. CACFP and SLP have different regulations, so you have to be careful with that. So there's a lot of different ways. I think another one is if the food package label says 100% whole grain pasta, 100% whole grain or whole wheat bread, those would be also considered whole grain rich. So there's 6 ways. So there's not one great way, but there's 6 wonderful ways.
Right. And you guys can always reach out to theicn.org. You can contact our help desk. You can reach out to Isabel at NCA. You can also Google search how to identify whole grains. USDA has a lot of good resources on that, but we are always here to help. And with that, I'm going to just thank you guys for your gift of time and attention today. And as always, thank you, Isabel, for sharing your expertise with us. And we look forward to hearing from you guys later. Talk to you soon. Have a great day. Be safe.